ramifications from quitting would be horrific. Like, and I learned early on. I actually had a time. There was a time I was sparring with a guy. I was 15 years old, and he was an open class champion. He was more experienced, and it was always tough sparring. I was basically fighting for my life every time, but I was getting better and better and better. But he would always put the pressure on. And I remember one time I backed into the corner, and I was so tired, and I said to myself, I'm gonna back into the corner, and when I get there, I'm gonna quit. Like, I'm just gonna put my hand. I'm just gonna tell him I'm just too tired. And when I got there, I started to drop my hands, and I was just about to say, I quit. And he advanced really quickly. Once he saw me start to drop my hands, he came in quickly. And I instantly fired like 10 punches, just bang, 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 bang. And I moved away, and all of a sudden I felt so good. And I had a great sparring, and we did, I did well the rest of it. And I remember that night driving home from the gym, and I said, I'm never going to quit again. You don't have to. Like, there's a reserve there, and you just have to find it. And that was the lesson. That was 1983 when that happened, and never quit since.
How do you balance that when you're a coach? Because you know yourself when you're boxing, what you're capable of, how much you've got reserve. But
Right.
when you're coaching a fighter, how do you judge that? Because we see, I never like to say a fighter quit because you never know what's going through their mind, how much pain they're suffering.
Right.
But as a coach, how do you balance that? How do you judge that? How do you get a gist of that?
Well, you have to know the fighter, right? And I give you an example. I had a guy, and he was in a fight, and he was in with a high level opponent, and I thought he was doing pretty well, but he got hurt a little bit, and it was obvious he wanted to quit. And knowing him and the situation, I stopped the fight, right? But I've had other fighters where they wanted to quit, but I knew they were just saying it because, like, they said it for the same reason I said it when I was 15. They were tired, and it seemed like a good idea at the time. But I knew this particular guy, I could push him through this. And I've done that several times. But like I say, I've had at least one other guy who I knew he wasn't going to be pushed through this. Like, once he made up his mind to quit, that was it. So you have to know your fighter. You have to know who you're dealing with. And, all fighters, you would think they're all, super tough and everything, but the limits are different for fighters. Some men have high limits, and some have relatively low, and you have to recognize that.
Quick question then. You're in the corner, Roberto Duran, Sugar Leonard, number two, and no Maz. How do you convince Roberto Duran to continue knowing how good a fighter he was?
Um, I think my impression of that was it didn't really have anything to do with boxing so much. Like,
Mm.
he was overpowered by something emotional, going through something, whatever. I think he felt like he was being embarrassed, and he just, as a macho Latino, he wasn't going to be embarrassed. Like, to him, stopping Ray from embarrassing him was going. He was trying to do it by fighting, but Ray was too fast. So he said, "Okay, well, I'm not going to give it a chance. I'm just going to quit." And in his mind at that moment, I think it was what he thought was the right thing, and I don't think you could have talked him out of it, in that situation. So he was gonna stop, and I think he regretted it probably immediately after. You know what I mean? Like in a big way. And I'm sure to this day it eats at him to a degree. But I think in those moments, nothing the trainer could say was going to get through to him.
So you're really good with the motivation and listening to your way you both speak to your fighters such as Chad Dawson, Bernard Hopkins. Where did you learn that, or did that come from the coaches that were with you, or is this something
Um,
from your own personality experiences?
I taught myself, like when I was talking, like in the Hopkins fight, and different fights with Lawrence Clay Bay. One time we had a thing. I'm talking almost to myself. Like, I'm telling them you have to push, because me personally, I have a lot of regrets from different fights. And, I was weight drained, and, mentally I wasn't there. And, and I regret them. And I hate it to this day. I hate it. I hate certain fights of mine because it just wasn't me. And, I wasn't able to push myself. And so when I see guys in a similar situation, it's more like me, like they're me, and I'm telling me, you don't want to do this, man. You don't want to ease back. You're gonna regret it for the rest of your life. And so I think they can feel the emotion. They don't realize I'm talking to myself. I'm telling myself through them, don't back up, man. Don't slow down. Don't let this go. And it's worked for me a few times. I think they could feel that I was very serious about it.
Okay. So you mentioned those fights you'd like to have back. Is there a particular fight or opponent you wish you'd go back and face again? If so, why?
Well, and it's funny, I was just thinking about it today because somebody asked me about the particular fight. But when I fought Tony Thornton, who was the number one contender at the time, and I
Was
was
that
just coming off
fight in Postman?
the Punchy Postman, right?
Yeah.
I was just coming off the loss to Tim Littles for the USBA title. And the
Okay.
thing with the Tim Littles fight was I got cut 3 spots really bad. It was a bad cut. And I went the distance, but I was cut bad. And I took the fight with Tony because I was excited because he was number one contender and everything. But it was too soon after the previous fight. And all my cuts opened up in the first round. Like, so I literally went 10 rounds just bleeding, bleeding, bleeding. Um, so that fight, I wish, looking back on it, I wish I took it, a little bit later, held off on taking it. But also, I was probably waiting too long because I had the cuts. And, I think I hesitated a little too much. And I wish I could go back and just push it a little bit more. And the same thing with when I fought Graciano Raccigiani in Germany. I went there, he's a good fighter. He's a world champion. And I was expecting a lot out of him. And I realized early in the fight, I was like, man, I'm doing pretty good with this guy. I can box, and I think I'm making him miss, and I'm a little quicker than him. And I think I realized too late in that fight that I was in a good position to win. And but being in Germany, you kind of have this thing where the judges you're already in the hole before the first bell even rings. You feel like there's little chance that I could win a decision. I think psychologically I wasn't thinking clearly in that fight. I didn't pull the trigger as quickly as I should have, because mentally I was like, we're in Germany and he's a hero, he's a big star over here. And I think I let the circumstances beat me more than the opponent actually beat me.
Hmm. It's interesting because it sounds like you're righting your wrongs as well as you
Yeah.
go through
Yeah,
your
for sure.
coaching career, because
Right.
you could have done better.
Right. Right.
You were capable of, but
Right.
the
For
reasons you
sure.
mentioned,
And that's
sadly,
the thing. Like, I
mm,
hate to see, like, I feel
wasted
like
potential.
right, with me, I never really, really fought my potential. I didn't. In clips I did, in certain fights, certain rounds. But so when I see guys who I know are good fighters, because I'd imagine my trainers must have said the same thing to themselves watching me fight. They must have been saying, "Come on, like you can do so much better. You can push yourself so much harder. You're letting it slip away, and you don't have to. You're better than this." So when I see fighters that I'm working with not reaching their potential, it's almost like me. If I help them, I'm kind of like, it's like I'm going back in time and helping myself. You know what I mean?
Mm.
It's a
So,
psychological thing with me.
yeah. So why do you think that was? What was it that had that effect on you or held
Uh,
you back or something?
well, I'll tell you, one major thing was throughout my career, making weight was always a big issue. And I always heard the stories, guys get weak and you're going to get weaker late in the fight. And sometimes I would almost be like, like it was me against the circumstances of boxing, right? And I would say to myself, okay, it's almost like boxing is a person, is an entity, and it's a war between me and boxing. And I'm saying, okay, boxing wants me to burn myself out early because I lost all that weight, and then around the fifth or sixth round, I'm gonna get weak, and then I'm gonna get crushed. That's how boxing works. So I almost said, okay, well, I'm gonna double cross boxing. I'm gonna hold back, and I'm gonna take my time, and I'm gonna come on later in the fight. Which is, it's just not how fights are won necessarily. So I think I let the circumstances of losing weight and just affect me in a way where I was thinking all these crazy thoughts and how to navigate the fights. And I didn't really have a trainer with me who understood it, and understood me, because I wasn't the type. I didn't I didn't put a lot of verbal trust in trainers, to help me through. I wanted to help myself through it. And, I guess I paid the price for it. But I try to let my fighters know that I understand. I understand the game. I understand what you're going through. You can trust me. You can tell me anything because I'm going to understand it. And I'm probably going to have a good idea of how to get you through it.
It feels like those experiences have made you such a good coach.
I believe in it 100%. Like, some trainers never boxed a day in their lives, and they're great trainers, right? But me personally, I use my experiences as a boxer, as a fighter, as a human being to navigate. Because, like I say, any boxer I work with, whatever they're going through, I've already done it. I've already felt it on whatever level I felt it at. That's why sometimes I think it's funny. Like, sometimes I'll say something to a fighter, and I remember one time, and I said it between rounds to this guy, and he looked at me and he goes, "How'd you know that? How'd you know that?" I said, because I told him what he was thinking. And I said, he goes, "How'd you know that?" I go, "Trust me, I know." And so he trusted me 100%. After that moment, I could see the look on his face. He trusted me 100%.
Yeah, it does sound like it's a mindset thing.
Yeah, for sure.
So it's quite a constant battle with your thoughts. What it
Yeah,
is, isn't it? Because no, when you step in the ring with someone, people watching the crowd, it is one on one. Mentally, it's a tough place to be.
right,
But you prove to yourself. I mean, in my opinion, you beat Michael Nunn, because he's a great boxer. So
right,
you proved to yourself you had that ability to go all the way.
right,
So
right.
was it more just a mindset thing then?
Yeah,
Just
everything
believe in yourself.
everything is mental. Everything in boxing. Like, when they say boxing is, some people say as high as 90%, it's mental. They have no idea how right they are. It's such a mental game. It's every aspect of it, from the training to the weigh-in to the dressing room to the walk to the ring to being in the ring, sitting down between rounds. Everything is mental. 100%.
Mm. So what about those moments where you did prove to yourself how good you were, and you were in that sort of flow state? What was is there any particular moment or fight which stands out in your mind that this is, you know you're in that zone, everything you're doing
Yeah.
is coming off?
I remember a couple fights. I remember I was on TV on USA Tuesday Night Fights against Alfonso Bailey, who was a very good fighter, who was a guy who I actually, before the fight, I was a little bit intimidated by the situation with him, because I knew his history, and he was very strong, and he had just beaten Dwight Davison, who was a number one contender. Uh, but I reached a point in that fight where it was just like everything was flowing, and I hit a groove. And for the last three rounds, the sixth and seventh and eighth round, in a row, I just was really, really on my game. And I remember another fight with Art Bayless, who was a very strong puncher at 175 pounds. And my trainer had actually turned down a fight with him about 6 months earlier. He wanted me to get one other fight in to get acclimated to the weight class. And when I fought him, same thing. I reached a point where I was really flowing. And I remember, I remember getting off a combination, and then I got a combination off, and I moved to the side a few feet, and he came after me, and without thinking, I just kind of stopped and I ran him right into a right hand. And it was, and I just remember at the moment I was smiling, I was laughing when it happened because I was thinking, wow, that was awesome. Like that was very smooth. Like I'm sharp. I'm on my game. Like and once I that one particular move happened and I landed the punch, from that moment on, I was just like floating on air. I just felt like $1 million. So sometimes psychologically, something as simple as that can just make you rise, and that's what happened.
What was there a particular method or technique you used to get yourself into that sort of rhythm, or did it just come
It just happened.
dynamic in the?
It literally just happened. Like when I threw the punch, it just happened. I didn't even realize it happened until after it actually landed. And I didn't plan it out or anything. And it was I said, man, I'm in a groove. I feel really sharp. And then from then my hands were just flowing, which is what you want. Like you want to reach a point. Like you see Roy Jones, Floyd Mayweather, they're almost always in a moment where their hands are just flowing like water. They're just smooth. It's effortless. For most of us, it's hard to reach that point, like as easily as they appear to.
Because it'd be interesting if you knew how to get into that rhythm.
Right. Oh man, I used to say, why can't I be like I was in the seventh round of that fight or the eighth and the ninth of that fight? Like, if you could bottle, and I used to, especially after the gym, some days I'd be sparring and I'd be like, man, like I'm a good fighter. Like I'm nasty. Like look at me. And I'm like, why can't we bottle this and just drink it anytime we want? But that's what separates the great fighters from good fighters. Like
That-
like like when I reach that point, I'm like, man, I'm on fire. I'm on fire. But a guy like Roy Jones, he reaches that point every fight. He's always like that.
yeah, well, it's interesting you said about bottling and drinking because I heard a story you narrated about a fight of yours about a drink you were giving him, which he believed
Yeah.
was like a magic potion.
Yeah,
So
yeah, yeah, for sure.
it's interesting you bring that up.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Because it was a fight where he was he wasn't in, I knew he wasn't in his best shape. And I said, man, he's a mental, he's really a mentally driven kid. And I said, man, I gotta do something to help this guy have some confidence. Because if he doesn't have confidence, he's not gonna throw any punches. So I gave him some protein powder mixed with water, and I said, man, I'm gonna give you the stuff, but I can only give you a little bit because it's really powerful. The doctor gave it to me, and it's like hydrofuel. I made it up, hydrofuel. I said hydrofuel, which I don't even think is a thing, but it sounded good. And he took it and he fought brilliantly, like he was on fire. So every fight, I had to give him this protein powder, which in reality probably didn't help at all, but in his mind, it helped.
Yeah, it's
So
that
we went to
placebo
this
effect,
one,
isn't it?
yeah, 100%. And we went to a fight in Miami, and he was fighting a very good opponent, a former world champion. And when we were getting ready to go to the arena, he's like, "Oh, you got the stuff, right?" And I'm like, "Oh yeah, 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 it's in the car. It's in the car." And I forgot. I left it home in Connecticut. I said, man, this guy, if I don't give him something, he's going to freak out. He's not going to be able to fight. And so I ran down Miami Beach, like, a mile or whatever. It's hot out. And I came across a 7-Eleven, and I went in. I said, man, I got to find something here. And I don't know why I came up with this concoction, but this is what I came up with. I came up with a Red Bull, water, and breath mints. I don't know why about the breath mints, but I
Must be
poured
Panama Lewis and
something.
Aguero
I poured half the
fire.
Red Bull out, and I replaced it with water. And then for some reason, I crushed up the breath mints and I put the breath mints in there, I guess to give it some kind of powdery look. And I mixed it up, and then I ran back to the hotel and I gave it to him. And he fought the former world champion and won every round. He threw 100 punches around. He looked awesome. And after the fight, all he could talk about was the concoction I gave him, right? And to this day, now that was 16 years ago. To this day, he has no idea that that's what I gave him. He has no idea. and because I'm sure he doesn't watch these podcasts, he doesn't know the story, and he doesn't realize if he did that. He never said anything to me about it, but so that worked with him. Yeah, for sure.
Amazing, amazing. Okay, so NFL, for example, American football, I hear that they often come out as scripted plays. Sort of for the first quarter, first 10, 15 plays are scripted. As a fighter, did you go in there for the first round always behind a specific game plan and then build off that, or was it just went in there and fight as you go along?
I think usually in the first round, I was careful. I wanted to get a gauge on the height and the reach and the speed and the power, especially the power. I would cover up and let the guys hit me on the gloves and the arms just so I could get a feel for the power. Um, but other than that, generally, me personally, I used to kind of feed off the opponent. Like whatever they were doing, I would try to counter that. Um, Sometimes I probably should have implemented a stronger game plan, kind of implemented, my own strengths. But a lot of times I was the type to, because I could box, I could be aggressive, I could do everything fairly well. So whatever they came up with, I would have something to try and offset it.
So, did you have any particular favorite sort of setups that you would like to test a fighter with?
Um, Well, one thing that I used to do, like I said, I used to keep my hands up, and a lot of times, and I did this very successfully a couple times with some very good fighters in the amateurs, and I did it in the gym all the time, where I would cover up and I would let them hit me because a lot of times when they're getting their punches off and I'm blocking them and I'm catching them, but they wouldn't realize right away that I was blocking them. It was almost like giving them free shots, and by the time they realized that they weren't hitting me flush and that they were getting tired, it was too late, and they were exhausted. Which was ultimately my goal. So now it didn't work with everybody. Some guys, it didn't work, but I would try that because I mean I remember I remember a guy and he was a good fighter. It's funny because he was a good fighter, and he came out early in the fight and he was letting his hands go and he was digging shots, and I think he thought he was catching me more than he was, so he kept it up. And so at one point he when he stopped and he kind of hesitated, and I said and I whispered to him, I said, you blew your load, huh? I said, you tired, huh? And he said, he actually said, he goes, yeah. Yeah. So it was fun. It didn't work on everybody, but it definitely worked. He almost couldn't help it. Like he had to say yeah, because I think he was impressed that I did that to him.
So, so are there any training techniques or strategies that you encountered as a fighter that you believe now are outdated or ineffective?
No, I think I'll tell you what it was a funny thing. A lot of fighters, and I saw somebody recently, like I think it was, and I don't want to, maybe it wasn't him, but I think it was Tank Davis. I think it was him, where he was talking about fighters from not that long ago, and he's talking about how the techniques are better, and the technical aspects, and I'm going, this guy doesn't know what he's talking about. Like the technique is not better. We have not evolved. People aren't doing stuff better now than they were in the 1950s and the 40s at all. You look at guys like Georgie Benton and Joey Giardello and Sugar Ray Robinson and all those guys. Their technique was 100 times better than the average guy today. So when Tank, and I think it was Tank, I think if it wasn't, I apologize, but I think it was him, and I'm like, man, he has no idea what he's talking about. Like the technique is not better today. These guys aren't technically wizards today. That's why I always say when you see a guy like James Toney and Floyd Mayweather, when they do the shoulder roll in the last 15 years, right? And everybody's amazed by the shoulder roll, right? Back in the day, everybody did the shoulder roll. It wasn't a big deal. It wasn't even something to brag about because everybody did it. It was common. Now the fact that it's not common and everybody's impressed by it tells you how the technique has regressed, because now they're doing stuff like a shoulder roll and everybody's acting like Floyd invented it. Come on, man. Watch Joey Jordan. Watch Archie Moore on video fighting against Rocky Marciano. And he actually dropped Marciano with the
Yeah.
counter right hand with a shoulder roll. People
Yeah.
don't know that though.
Yes. Interesting. So what are the best techniques then, which you think are still, or maybe you still use them today, train your fighters? So the best techniques. And so who was coaching you as well? So who was your coach? What are the best techniques you picked up, which you still use today? Then.
Um, I think of all the guys I worked with, the most knowledgeable in my eyes was Russ Amber, who is actually a cut man now for Usyk and guys like that, and he actually owns Rival Products, which is probably realistically the premier boxing equipment company today. Like when you see all the big fights, usually one or both of the guys are wearing Rivals. So Russ has been in the game a long time, and Russ actually showed me a few techniques that I still teach and I use myself, that I think were very, very impressive. I think Russ was probably the best technical coach that I've worked with.
Yeah, I remember in the early days of YouTube, I used to watch Ross Amber with David Limmer as a kid.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I remember watching those videos many years ago. Yeah, yeah.
Right.
So, what was the most surprising thing you learned about yourself through the highs and lows of your fighting career?
Um, I'll tell you what, I learned in a certain way, for better or worse. Some people may say it's a bad thing, that I'm mentally indestructible. And by that I mean, if we're gonna fight, like I always said, I wish fights were 30 rounds. 30 rounds, because there's very few people who are going to beat me in a 30-round fight. I was going to be there and I was going to get stronger. And when we hit the 15th and 16th round, I was going to loosen up. It actually took me 8, 9 rounds just to really feel good in fights. But I've been through things in fights where I was tested as a person so deeply that people who watched the fights couldn't even tell. They didn't even know it was happening. And I'll give you an example. I was in a fight on ESPN against a guy named Ernest Martin, who was a big light heavy. Ernest was much bigger than I was, even though we weighed the same. He was much bigger than I was. We fought in a ring on a summer night on ESPN, that in a building that had no ventilation and no windows. It was a concrete brick building, and it was in the middle of summer, and we had the TV lights. So they estimate that it was almost heading towards 120 degrees in the building, and I had a little trouble making the weight. Basically, believe it or not, I was from halfway through the second when he caught me with a huge overhand right that literally lifted me off the ground. And from that moment on to the very end of the fight, the end of the 10th round, I thought I was in the dressing room thinking about the fight. I was hallucinating during the fight. I
Wow.
thought at one point, I thought his head was as big as a beach ball. That's what it looked like to me. His head was huge. It looked like it was, picture a beach ball with a face on it, and it was right in front of me, a foot away. That's what I saw. I saw at one point I slipped in the corner on some water, I guess, and or my tassels, I think, but whatever I slipped on. And when I was on the ground, I didn't know how I got there. I thought I wondered if he hit me. I thought maybe he caught me with a shot, but he didn't. Uh, and when I was on the ground, I said, okay, I got to get up now. And I'm saying to myself, I don't think I can get up. I might not be able to get up, even though I didn't get hit, because I couldn't find my balance. And then at one point, I looked to my left and I saw my friend, this kid named Dino. And I saw Dino and I said, hey, in my head, I'm like, hey, Dino's here. I go, I must really be fighting. This must be real. And I stood up and I couldn't see anything. I was blind. And the referee said, "You okay?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm good. I'm good." And I was blind. I put my hands up and I just walked forward because I knew he'd hit me, and then I'd know where he was. And that happened to me. People may not
Right.
believe it, but and I know for sure there's fighters who have quit, 100% quit under much less trying circumstances than that. I know a lot of guys who would quit under those circumstances, and
Mm.
quitting never entered my mind ever. Like I did everything I could to hide it, and I did so well that after the fight, nobody had any idea that was happening to me. I had to explain it to them.
Wow. Scary moments, aren't they? Really, those.
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So, as a coach, being around world champions, you train world champions. How do you continue to learn and improve as a coach? Whilst, uh, how do you carry on learning? I mean, you've been there at the top of the sport. I mean,
Right,
I mean, I have mentors, but
right,
how about yourself? You are the sort of people that we seek out. Billy Pound is my mentor. He speaks to you as well. So,
right.
well, who do you speak to continue your learning?
I mean, it's funny because I keep my eyes open. I watch stuff, and I tell you, a few years ago, I was in the gym, and there was a kid. He must have been 14 or 15 years old, amateur kid, and he did a move, and I remember thinking that was nice. That was, I said, I'm gonna use that. I'm gonna steal this move from this 14-year-old kid who isn't even an open class amateur yet, but he did such a nice move, a good technique, and I just remember thinking, man, I gotta steal this. I gotta take this from this kid. And another time, I remember being in the gym, and there was a guy who didn't even have any fights. He was just an amateur who was waiting for his first fight, and he used to, he was just a maniac. Like, he would just train, and he was training, and he was focused, and he wouldn't talk to anything. I didn't even know his name. And one day, kind of joking, I said to him myself, I said, "Man, let me ask you something." I said, "What is it with you?" I said, "All you do is train. Like, you're like an animal. Like, all you do is train constantly. You're doing all this stuff." I said, "Why? What is your goal here?" And I remember he said to me, he said, "Well, I figure I'm not the fastest guy. I'm not the strongest. I don't hit the hardest." And he named like 10 things that he wasn't. And he said, "So I figure if I'm going to be successful, I better be in better shape than everybody that there is. Everybody who has all those attributes, I can at least be in better shape than them." And I said, "Yeah, yeah, it's good." And I remember going home, driving home, thinking about it. And I was like, this man is a genius. Like, this guy never fought a day in his life yet, and he's got it figured out. Like, he really does. And I've passed that advice on word for word to dozens of guys in the years since.
I think that reminds me of a story of maybe Andy Reid, the head coach of the Kansas City Chiefs. I'm not sure what stage of the career it was, but he talked about getting a play from one of the cleaners of the stadium. They drew a play up, and it was pretty good, and he kept it.
Yeah, there you go.
Always be a student, isn't it? We always
Yeah.
can always learn from someone, can't you? Okay. So, can you share a specific example or a breakthrough moment you had with one of your fighters during training, where maybe it was a particular technique or something we just discussed now? Uh,
Right.
anything come
I'll
to
tell you
mind?
something that was really cool. Some fighters are quick learners, like quick, like I had a boxer, an amateur, a high level amateur named Sammy Vega, and I would show him. I remember showing him a nice move in the dressing room before the fight, and in the fight, like 20 minutes later, he pulled this move off 3 or 4 times, like perfectly. Like, he was just a quick learner, quick study. Uh, but by the same token, when I was training Chad Dawson the first time when he was still a middleweight, and I worked with him on his left hook, and I was trying to get a certain snap because he had like a pushing left hook. He didn't really get power or snap into it. And I remember, and I used Roy Jones as a model, and I showed him Roy landing his hooks. and there's a kind of whipping motion to it, and there's a way you got to have your feet, and whatever. And I kept working with him, and I was amazed that he didn't catch on quickly. Uh, he kept working on it, and one day, and it was a while longer. I don't remember how long exactly, but it was a while, more longer than I thought it would. And I just remember one day it was either on the mitts or sparring. I think it was on the mitts, but it might have been sparring. But either way, and he just out of the blue threw the hook the way we had been working on it, and he literally looked at me like I did it. That was his look on his face, like I did it. And then after that, he did it all the time. But it took a while. But to see that happen, knowing that I taught him and that I showed him and that we stayed with it and I didn't just forget about it. And, it was like building something and we stayed there till it was built. And so that moment, was pretty cool. It was satisfying.
Yeah, yeah. So, what's one piece of advice you give to all of your fighters, regardless of skill level or experience?
Basically what that kid told me. I just told a group of kids the other day. I said, you might not be the fastest, you might not be the strongest, you might not hit the hardest, etc., etc., etc. But you can be in great shape and you can beat people if you have the desire and you have some skills, but you have to have the desire, the psychological makeup. You can beat people who are better than you. Whenever they say, may the best man win, you know, they think it means skill, but for me it doesn't. Like it means who's the best man skill wise and mentality wise, and who's driven. Because I can remember fights, especially in the amateurs at a high level, national, deep into the tournament, and I beat guys who were better than me, for sure. Like because I wanted to win way more than they did, apparently, because I overtook them, and so I say, man, you watch a fight. That's why I watch a fight, and you watch a fight early in the first round, and too many people after they see the first round and they go, oh, that guy's he's killing that guy, he's gonna win that fight. I go, listen, man, the first round means nothing. They both feel good. They're both getting loose. I said, wait till the fight heats up. Wait till the third round. Then you got to see who's going to do what. The third, the fourth, the fifth. A lot of times, the fights are different in the fourth and fifth than they are in the first.
So, what about any unconventional training methods you've developed or adopted which have proven effective?
I do a lot of training stuff that's mentality geared, right? And like I have a thing I do where I lay a heavy bag on the ground, so it's flat on the ground, and I have the fighter stand next to it, and I have them jump over it, left, right, over, both feet at the same time. They bounce, they bounce, they bounce, and I have them do it for a minute, and I try to. The goal is to do 100 jumps in a minute. Now, most people to even do a minute is a miracle, let alone 100 in a minute. Uh, and so that one I think is one of the closest exercises I've ever trained anyone or done myself that was like a fight. A lot of training doesn't really feel like a fight. It doesn't feel that level of difficulty. But I call that the bag jump. And the bag jump is similar to what it feels like to be in a boxing match.
It's very interesting. So, how do you measure success as a coach beyond just the wins and losses in the ring?
Um, I think I've been very successful, really. And I'll tell you because, like a lot of people think, a good coach is a guy who trains world champions. He's got the high level guy, right? But to me, I decide a good coach on this. If you could take a regular amateur, just a regular kid, an average run of the mill kid, or you could take a pro who's 7 wins and 2 losses. He's a decent guy. He's probably not going to be world champion, but if you could take those guys and improve them to the point where people, even though they say they're not going to be an Olympic champion or they're not going to be world champion. But if people notice and say, wow, this guy's gotten a lot better, that's a good coach. There's coaches out here who may never train a world champion. You may never hear their name. Like their name will never be known to more than 100 boxing fans in their local area. But they're good. They're really good coaches. And I could tell you, like, brother Nazim Richardson, who trained Shane Mosley and Hopkins. And I remember when he started training Shane Mosley and he started doing the thing with the swim without getting wet, and everybody started repeating that. And they said, "Oh, this guy's great, great trainer." And I said, "Man, you guys are just hearing about him last week. I've known Nazim for 10 years. I remember him when he was an amateur coach with his sons and his nephews at the National Boxing Foundation tournament in Cincinnati, Ohio, back in 1994. And I saw him there, and I realized what a good coach he was back then. So there's a lot of coaches like him out there. There's many good coaches that you're never going to hear of, or you may not hear of for another 10 years. But everybody who knows them now knows they're a very good coach.
Mm. So, what qualities do you believe are essential in a world-class boxer, and how do you cultivate these in your trainees? I mean, I've heard another coach say, "You need a horse in the race." It doesn't matter how good a coach you are, if
Right.
you haven't got a horse in the race, it's going to be difficult. But on the flip side, there's got to be qualities which you see in a fighter, you can develop to a world-class fighter, and how would you then look to expand those and cultivate them?
Right. Well, it goes with what I was saying earlier. And what they said, what you just said is accurate. Like there's guys, they're never going to be world champion. Like there's no chance. They don't have the skill, they don't have the athleticism, they don't have the power, they don't have certain things. But you can, like I say, the mark of a good trainer isn't necessarily making champions, it's making guys better. If I take a guy who's a 6 round fighter and nobody even cares about him, nobody knows anything, but I can improve him to the point where people are like, man, this guy's good. He's getting really good. Congratulations. Like he's way better than he was a year ago. Well, that's a good coach. So I'm looking for that kind of thing. And also you get a good coach. A good coach could add value to just about anybody. Like I feel like myself, I could come in with just about any fighter on earth. Anyone. Like Crawford, anyone. And if I work with him for an hour, I'm gonna find something he could improve on that I could, sharpen up or whatever. Like even like a guy as good as Better Bayev, as awesome as he is. When I started working with him, there were things I helped him with that he improved with for sure. 100%. He'll tell you that himself. Uh, so as good as anybody is, there's always somebody that can improve them. Even, like I say, there's amateur coaches out there across this country, across the world that we're never going to hear about. You're never going to know these guys. But right now, they've got 6 guys who've won national championships, and they've got 12 guys in the last 20 years who've been ranked in the top 10 in the country. They're developing good boxers, and there's a lot of guys like that.
So, are there any common traits or characteristics between the world-class or world champion fighters you've had?
Well, the most important thing is the mentality, and all the guys I've had, to a certain degree, they had the mentality to dig down. Because if you're a guy, like I say, when I do that drill where the guys jump over the bag for a minute, I'm thinking to myself, I don't care. You think I want you to make the minute. I want you to make 100 in a minute. And I do. But that's not what I'm looking for. I'm looking for what you look like 3/4 of the way through. Do you have resignation on your face? Are you looking to quit, or are you looking to dig down and get better? Are you making faces so you can dig down harder? And I could tell by the body language, I could tell by the noises they make halfway through who wants it to be over and who doesn't want it to be over. There's some people who wish that the ceiling would cave in so they could stop jumping. And there's other guys who want to keep going. They want to, as tired as they are, they want to dig through that. And that's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for that guy, 100%.
We had a question come in, and it was, how would you train? You mentioned this, the shoulder roll. Uh, how would you train someone with the lead hand low? Maybe someone who likes to use the shoulder roll. I'm assuming they meant the shoulder roll with the lead hand low. So how would you train someone with the lead hand low?
How would I train the guy who does that?
Yeah.
I mean, here's the thing. So, like a lot of guys, they'll look at a fighter and they go, "Oh, he drops his right hand. You got to keep his hands up." I mean, in the reality, everybody drops their right hand. Like everybody drops their hands. But like people could criticize Roy Jones, especially if you get a guy who really doesn't know boxing that well. He'd look at Roy Jones and say, his technique is horrible. His hands are low. He's going to get caught with the hook. And I said, listen, if you put Roy Jones' hands up, he's not going to be as effective. His reflexes and his skills and his head movement and his lightning counter punches. He's sucking. Part of the reason his hands are down is so he can draw you in so he can counter you. You take a Roy Jones, a Muhammad Ali, and you put their hands up like you're supposed to, they're not going to be the fighters they were. They're not going to be as good. Roy Jones wouldn't be as good if he fought conventionally. You have to recognize that some people are just gifted and they're fast, and their reflexes are on another level. And so you have to implement that into the game. I wouldn't train Roy Jones to fight on the inside, blocking shots. I wouldn't do that because that's not him. I would teach him, he knows already, but I'm saying a guy like Roy Jones, I would teach them to maneuver on the inside and twist their opponents and get on angles and hit them off the angles and things like that. But as far as like hands up, it, some guys are too gifted, you'd actually hamper them by trying to teach them to do things properly.
So do you think a coach can be too technical then?
Well, you have to look at the individual. And I've said this many times, and I'm not going to name names, but I could tell you three high level coaches, famous people, guys, right? That teach all their fighters to fight exactly the same. Exactly. They teach all their fighters. They could teach, a 6'4" clumsy white guy or a 5'7" super fast African American, right? Or a 5'8" super tough Mexican. They teach them all to fight the same exact way. That's wrong. That is absolutely positively 100% wrong. There's no way you have a gym full of 15 guys and luck would have it, they all should be taught the same exact style because they all have the capability to do that. That's ridiculous. But I've seen three famous, if I name them, you would know them instantly. Famous trainers, and they all made that mistake. All three of them. And I've seen it. I've seen it play out, and I've sparred. I had one of my fighters fight one of their fighters, and I've sparred with one of their guys. And I remember sparring, and I was thinking, the way he's teaching this guy to do, the generic style that he's teaching, is never going to work for him. And I'm going to prove it. And I'm going to show him that it's not going to work. And it didn't work. And I was very successful against this particular fighter. Uh, you know, some guys, you take Cus D'Amato worked with Tyson, and he had Tyson and Floyd Patterson doing the peekaboo, and it worked. Like those guys were unbelievable. But I'm sure there were many fighters who tried the peekaboo, and it just didn't work for them, and it wouldn't work for most people. Tyson and Floyd Patterson were exceptions to the rule, I would say.
Yeah, yeah. It's not a style which outside of guys like Tyson, Patterson, Jose Torres, David Tua maybe as well. There hasn't been as much success with that sort of style of fighting.
Right.
Okay,
Yeah, they wouldn't. Yep.
so how do you handle the emotional highs and lows that come with coaching, and particularly when a fighter you train experiences a setback?
You know, being a trainer for me is just like being a fighter. it's emotional, and like when the fighter loses, and especially if he loses badly, I mean, it's devastating. I feel it the way he does. And when they win, especially when they win in a way where you kind of won as a team, you won because of the game plan and it helped out. It's winning feels like when I was a fighter. It feels very not quite as good. It never is going to feel as good as it does for the fighter, but the highs and lows are extremely similar.
Mm. So, how about having fighters? You've seen potential in a fighter that was overlooked. Ever had those other experiences? So maybe as a fighter, other coaches haven't been particularly fond of, but you've seen him, and you've seen more potential and managed to get it out of him. Any experiences such as those?
I've had that a little bit. I've trained guys, a couple guys that people probably gave up on to a degree. Um, I mean, I'm the type, if I had a guy who I just didn't think could make it, right? I would tell him. I would tell him, professional boxing is not for you. And it's not even saying you're not a good fighter. I'm just saying to reach the level where you want to go, I don't think it's worth it for you to try, because this is a dangerous, serious sport, serious game. But I've seen a few guys where people didn't give them the chance maybe that they deserved, and I gave it my shot and helped them, and I think they did better probably than people thought they were going to do. But there's definitely guys out there who trainers give up on, and sometimes they don't go to another coach. They just give up. The trainer convinces them to give up, and they give up. There's guys that probably could have been salvaged and saved, but the trainer probably took the spirit out of them, and they didn't even want to try to go anywhere else.
So, what role do you think mentorship then plays in boxing?
What's the word? What'd you say?
Mentorship. So, you mentioned
Oh yeah,
with respect to fighters and getting them back on track. So,
yeah.
what role does mentorship play in boxing? I know you mentioned Russ Amber is the most one of the best guys who've been around. But do you still have any other mentors at all that help you as well? So not only the fighters, but yourself as well, needing mentorship.
Um, I mean, at this point in my life and career, I wouldn't say I have any mentors now that I'm really following. I think I've reached the role. I'm kind of like a Jedi. I've reached the Jedi level. I'm a mentor now. I think I like to think I'm a pretty good one. I think I know I've helped certain guys, to advance and get better, and help them through mentality wise. I've had guys who their boxing skills weren't the problem. Their mentality was the problem. And I've been able to recognize that and help them. And I think they know that.
So what legacy do you hope to leave behind in the world of boxing, and how do you work towards that every day?
I just do what I do every day. The same thing I've always done. And I think, I mean, I would like to be remembered as, when the time comes, as someone who loved boxing, who loved fighters, who put the fighters first, and always was on their side. You know, I'm on the fighter side, 100%. Uh,
Mm.
I like to be remembered as someone who loved the fighters and wanted to see them succeed in the ring and out, especially after their careers were over. Uh, but I always, I have a lot of friends in the game. I have a lot of trainer friends, fan friends, promoter friends, and there's been a few times when we're all talking and we're laughing and we're joking and whatever's happened. But there's been a few times when people in the game who didn't have the right, they thought they did, but they don't. They thought they had the right to be insulting towards fighters on a personal level, like saying a guy's a bum or a guy has no heart, that type of thing. And I've had to step in and say, listen, we're friends and everything, and you're in the game, and I get it, but you're not in a position to say that. Like you know, you don't even know what that it means. You don't know what it means. It would be like saying a guy in Vietnam and he did something and you called him a coward. I said, man, he was there. Like that guy was in the jungle. You know what it took for him to reach the point where he had to do something that you would call him a coward for is a point you would never reach in a million years in your life. You would never have the guts to even get on that field, you know, to put that uniform on. This guy was out there in uniform, and maybe he reached a point where he wasn't Audie Murphy, he wasn't George Patton and Patton, you know, but he's still doing more than you're doing. So, certain people, I think, they'll know my legacy is we're not going to insult the fighters too deeply here. We can be critical, but if you're not a fighter, I'm not going to let you be super critical of, you know, where it gets to the point where you're being insulting and offensive, because there's a line drawn between the boxers and everybody else. And, you know, and I stand by that 100%.
Yeah. So last couple of questions then. So your three favorite fighters, and then also the three fights you would most like to have been in the corner for.
Right. Well, I would say Muhammad Ali's obviously always been my number one. I would say Sugar Ray Leonard and Roy Jones come to mind as my top three. Um, on the one hand, I would like to say I would love to be there for the Hearns and Leonard fight, the first one in 1981. But the corner work by Angelo Dundee was so perfect that I wouldn't have want to been there and maybe run the risk of changing the course of history and messing things up. So I think I need to let Angelo keep his place. He did an unbelievable job. I would, if I could carry the bucket or just be there in the front row uh, at that fight, I think that'd be good enough for me.
But then on the flip side, then are there fights you wish you were in the corner for because you believe you would have had an impact on the changing the outcome of the fight?
Um, I've seen a couple guys quit in the corner. I've seen, and there's one of them. Honestly, I can't remember. It was so long ago. It was back in the, I think it was in the 1990, maybe 91, 89, something. But guys who have faltered mentally, you could kind of see it where they were faltering, and you could see they were kind of drowning, and then they eventually drowned. I would have liked to have been there to take a crack at preventing them from drowning. You know, there's a few fights probably in the history that I wish I could have give it a shot.
Yeah, it's when you get to the top of the sport, it's just that 1%, 2% difference, isn't it? Which can be mental usually,
Yeah,
make all the difference.
yeah, yeah.